Hey Tony, it's Friday. Question of the week. I would actually love to see those videos. I really enjoyed it the first time because it was kind of cool to see what you do in your life other than just you sitting at the same table that I sit at as I am here in one of my two spots, either by our computer or by my Welsh flag. So yeah, I would actually love to see more videos of those, Tony. And honestly, I'd prefer them more than just the D&D videos because those are interesting for sure. But I find the places that you go to be more cool than the things you do. Just my own 2 cents there. And so, as I'm going to talk about my 2 cents here, this video is going to be like a spider, I think. It's going to come in 2 parts. Part 1 is going to be, I have some good news. I already told you, but I ended up passing the MPRE for Massachusetts, which means I can take the awful bar exam here and in Connecticut. I was already planning on doing that, but now I know I can, which is awesome. Makes me super happy. It's a bit of a weight off my chest because I was super concerned about, oh, did I pass it? Did I not? Not only did I pass it, I did pretty darn good on it. So the entire test itself, you have to get an 85 to pass. The first time I took it, I got a 73. Now, it's out of 120 points. So last time I was close, but I didn't get there, of course. This time, not only did I pass, I got a 102. I got an 85% on that, and that's a really hard exam. It's called basically the junior bar exam because it's very similar. It's similar in setup and similar in importance as well. So I passed it with flying colors, which was awesome. Made me super happy, and I've kind of been walking on air for the rest of the day because that was awesome. It really kind of made my week. Not to say my week was bad, but it really made my week. And now the other part of the good news is yesterday I ended up driving out to Hartford, Connecticut to drop off my bar application for Connecticut. And they accepted it. Now there's more paperwork I have to do for Connecticut, but it's relatively minor. But I'm still going to be taking the exam, and I'll be able to take the exam in Connecticut and in Massachusetts. And since they're both under what's called the Universal Bar Exam, it means that I'm going to actually end up getting my score will be able to transfer between the two states. Or as they like to call it in their fancy legal terminology, my score will be able to pass between the 2 jurisdictions. So I'm pretty happy on that. It's one big thing that's been weighing me down for a while, and it's great. My exams are going to be not next week, but the week after. I have 5 exams this semester. They're going to be somewhat tough, but it is what it is. And now time for part 2 of this video, the one that I'm going to find more interesting than you are. So one of the courses I've taken this semester is administrative law. And it's basically the law of government agencies. So for an example, like the EPA, the Environmental Protective Agency, is one of those agencies, as are numerous other federal government regulatory bodies. And in my administrative law course, we had an assignment this past week that was called Admin Law in the News, in which you end up reading the news and picking out any bit of administrative law that you can find. We had to choose 3 articles, and we had to write about one of them. Now, of my 3 articles, two of them were really interesting, whereas one of them was interesting but not that administrative, really. And I'm going to talk about those 2. Unfortunately, one of the 2 I had was a really short article. It was only about 3 paragraphs long, so I couldn't really write much about it. I'm really interested in that I probably will try and dive deeper into it. So one of the core features of administrative law is called Chevron deference. Basically, in layman's terms, what Chevron deference is when a government makes a statute, then Chevron deference says if that statute gets taken to court, the court will basically assume that the agency knows what they're doing. And this has been somewhat unpopular amongst specific people, including most notably the Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch. when he was a judge on the 10th Circuit, he was pretty against Chevron deference because it gives a lot of power to the agencies over the people who, or rather, over the people that the regulation is supposed to impact. Well, Arizona became the first state to legitimately outlaw Chevron deference and basically say, this is not our precedent, therefore we're not going to accept it. Now, for a brief foray into the separation of powers, there are three branches of government. There is the legislative branch, which makes the laws, the executive branch that execute the law and basically make sure it's upheld, and then there's the judicial branch, which interprets the law. And all things that the branches can do, they all have specific powers. So a good example is, say the Supreme Court sets up this analysis, sets up, for example, Chevron deference. That becomes binding precedent, and that becomes the law, unless otherwise adjusted by a state or by the federal government itself. And so Arizona became the first state to do that. They delegitimized Chevron deference and basically said that these agencies we shouldn't give these agencies the benefit of the doubt on any lawsuits that come their way. And so that's kind of big news because Chevron deference is one of the core concepts of administrative law and is one of the core concepts of what's known as the administrative state. Now, the administrative state it's all the regulatory bodies within our country, and there are a ton. There are specific people and specific congressmen who aren't particularly fond of the administrative state because they think that less regulation is better regulation. In fact, President Trump is actually one of the firm believers that that government regulation kills jobs and less regulation adds more jobs. It's always a pretty contentious issue because both sides say that the facts they have prove that either regulation is good or that lack of regulation is good. I'm not necessarily an expert in this. Now, I personally believe that more regulation is better regulation, but there is a limit, and within our country, there are regulatory bodies and regulations that are just dumb, that don't really do much and do weaken the country. So this is really big news in the world of administrative law because this is a core principle that could be completely changed by what's going on in Arizona. Now, what's going to happen in Arizona is there's going to be a court case that's going to eventually end up to the Supreme Court in probably 4 or 5 years, where they'll determine if that law was actually, or that statute was constitutional or not, and whether it should remain precedent. So that was one of the articles. The other article one of the other articles that I brought up was how the state of California is actually suing the Trump administration and the Census Bureau for a question on the upcoming census about, are you a U.S. citizen? Now, for a little bit of background, I don't have much time, but a little bit of background on that is every 10 years, the country is forced to do a census to make sure that these many people are here. It sets up like the amount of congressmen you can have. It sets up your delegates you can, or the delegates you can have for the presidential election, or how many electoral votes you can have for the presidential election. So it's a pretty important thing. And the Trump administration, well, the Census Bureau at first didn't have this citizenship question on the census until the Trump administration and the Department of Justice actually wrote a letter that recommended that the Census Bureau do this. And they did. So there is supposed to be a citizenship question on the census on, are you a U.S. citizen or not? Now, the state of California is actually suing the administration because they believe that will violate the enumeration clause of the Constitution, which basically says that you must have an accurate count of how many people are in your country. And so they're raising this claim against the Trump administration that could have some pretty far-reaching consequences. Namely, it could set up, if states can sue this agency that has never really had an issue, and will also set up the precedent of whether or not the Census Bureau can actually bring something like this up. So, Tony, my question for you is, what interesting news articles have you read lately? Tony, I will see you on Tuesday. Later, bro.